أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رسولا ونبيا رب أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك رب أن يحضرون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Continuing on with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam's legendary government military legacy, the era of Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab, after completing 40 videos of Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab and a total of 50 videos of the Prophet ﷺ's legendary military legacy, the era of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and a total of 30 videos of the Prophet ﷺ's military legacy, or, excuse me, his military career himself. Now on page number 101, 3.3.7, verbal and written rebuks. Now these are of course methods that Sayyidina Umar used to discipline his agents and his governors that we were speaking of in this chapter. Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu rebuked some of his governors for their conduct. When they met with him, he rebuked Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. He told him on several occasions, and he rebuked Iyad ibn Ghanam, Khalid ibn al-Walid, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, and other governors as well. There were also many written rebuks during the time of Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab, such as when, Umar wrote to one of his governors when some people had come to him and he had given to the Arabs and not to the non-Arabs. Umar wrote, it is sufficient evil for a man to despise his fellow Muslims. End quote. From all of this, we can see that the governors were not safe from being called to account and disciplined in different ways. Mankind had never seen anything like this in terms of justice and courage, which made the era of rightfully guided caliphs a fine example of Islamic civilization. After the era of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself, freedom of discussion between the Khalif and his governors was guaranteed to a remarkable extent. The governors did not fear the authority of the Khalif. Here follows some examples of that. When Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu came to Syria, he was met by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan with great entourage. When Muawiyah saw Umar, he dismounted from his horse and walked up to him and said, "Peace be upon you, O Amir al-Mu'mineen." Umar walked on and did not return his greeting, and Muawiyah ran behind Umar's camel. He was a rather heavy-set man, and he started fainting, he says. So Abdurrahman ibn Auf says, "O Amirul Mu'mineen, you have worn that man out. Why don't you speak to him?" Umar turned to him and said, "O Muawiyah, are you the owner of the entourage that I see?" He said, "Yes, O Amirul Mu'mineen." Umar said, "And in addition, that you keep away from the people and those who are in need stand waiting at your door?" Muawiyah said, "Yes, O Amirul Mu'mineen." He said, "Why is that? Woe to you." Muawiyah said, "Because we are in a land where the enemy has many spies, and if we do not take precautions, the enemy will no longer fear us and they will attack us. As for the doorkeeper, we are afraid that we will lose respect and the people will become audacious. I am still your agent, and if you forbid me to do that, I will stop, O Amirul Mu'mineen." Umar said, "Whatever I ask you, you have an answer. If you are telling the truth, it is a smart idea, and if you are lying, it is a smart and stupid trick. I am not commanding you, and I am not forbidding you." And he left him in that manner. Despite Umar ibn al-Khattab strictness with his governors and his careful watching of them, and his readiness to dismiss any of them of whom he was suspicious or about whom he received well-founded complaints. There was a strong bond of love and loyalty between them. They had complete faith in their Khalif's sincerity, soundness of intention, policies, and justice. If Umar lost contact with any of his leaders in the area or the arena of jihad, the worry would almost kill him, and he would be overwhelmed with fear and concern for them. During one of the major wars, he went out himself to try and find news and put his mind at rest. In other cases, he met them, and we see signs of the deep love that had existed between them. When Umar bin Khattab went to conquer Jerusalem, he reached Al-Jabiyya, where he met his commanders Amr ibn al-As and Shahrabil ibn Hasana. Umar met them riding, and they kissed his knees, and Umar hugged each of them. The dismissal of Khalid ibn al-Walid. The enemies of Islam have a vivid imagination and intense hatred which enables them to hunt out reports which show the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in bad light. If they cannot find any reports that please them, they fabricate reports that they think the people will accept, so that they may become a source for narrations or narrators and authors. Both Umar ibn al-Khattab and Khalid ibn al-Walid have been exposed to the fabrication of the enemies of al-Islam who have tried to distort the historical record. They paid a great deal of attention to the reasons why Umar dismissed Khalid ibn al-Walid, and they made false accusations against these two great men and fabricated reports which did not stand up to close scrutiny. There follows the true story of the dismissal of Khalid ibn al-Walid, which took place in two stages, and for which there were objective reasons. The first dismissal. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu dismissed Khalid ibn al-Walid for the first time from the general leadership and governorship in Syria. This happened in 13 years after the Hijriya, when Umar succeeded to the Khalifa after the death of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. The reason for this dismissal was the difference in the way Abu Bakr and Umar dealt with their agents and governors. Abu Bakr's method of dealing with his governors and agents was to give them complete freedom within the framework of the general system of the state, subject to the condition that they be completely just and fair between individuals and groups. He did not mind whether he himself made sure justice was done or his governors did that. The governor had the right, based on the consent of the Khalifa, to run the affairs of his province without referring every minor issue to the Khalifa. Abu Bakr did not see any need to undermine the authority of his governors with regard to wealth or anything else, so long as justice prevailed in their provinces. Umar advised Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to write to Khalid, telling him not to give anyone a sheep or a camel except by his command. Abu Bakr wrote to Khalid as suggested, and Khalid wrote back to him saying, "Leave me alone to do my work my way, otherwise you should do it yourself." Umar suggested that he dismiss him, but Abu Bakr as-Siddiq left Khalid in his post. When Umar ibn Khattab became Khalifa, he thought that the Khalif should set out for his governors and agents guidelines on how to govern their provinces and make it obligatory for them to report to him everything that happened, so that he could examine the matter and issue commands accordingly, and they would be obliged to carry out his commands. That was because he thought that the Khalif was responsible for what he did and for what his governors did as well, and that this responsibility was not discharged even by selecting the best governors. When he became Khalifa, he addressed the people and said, "Allah is testing you by my means of me. Allah Ta'ala is testing you by means of me and is testing me by means of you, and He has kept me alive after my two companions are gone. None of your affairs that I witness will I let anyone else deal with, and none of your affairs that I do not witness, but I will strive hard to ensure that they are dealt with. If the governors do well, I shall reward them, but if they do badly, I shall punish them. And he used to say, do you think that if I appoint over you the best one I know, then I enjoin him to be just? Will I have fulfilled my duty? They said yes. He said, no, not until, and only until I examine his work and see whether he has done what I commanded him to do. When Umar became Khalifa radiallahu anhu, he wanted the governors to change to his method. Some of them agreed and others refused, and among those who refused was Khalid ibn al-Walid. It was narrated from Malik ibn Anas that when Umar became Khalifa, he wrote to Khalid saying, do not give anyone a sheep or a camel except by my command. Khalid wrote back to him saying, either you leave me to do my job or you will do it yourself. Umar said, I will not be sincere towards Allah if I advise Abu Bakr Siddiq to do something, then I do not implement it myself. And then he dismissed him from the general leadership. Moreover, he would call upon him to do things and he would refuse unless he was given free rein to do what he wanted him to do. But Umar refused to allow that. So Umar dismissed Khalid on the basis of his policy of rule and the rule's right to direct the affairs of state and his responsibility for the state. Things like this happen naturally in everyday life, and there is nothing strange about this case that would require us to try to find an explanation based on reports, opinions, whims, and desires, and different inclinations. Umar ibn al-Khattab was the Khalif of the entire nation at the time, and people were still close to the time of the prophethood, and one of his basic rights was the right to choose governors and commanders who were in harmony with him and his policies and method of ruling, to work with him so long as the Ummah had plenty of qualified people. The governors and commanders did not have the right to remain in their post forever, especially when there were political differences between the ruler and the governors, so long as there were others who would replace them and do the same job. History shows us that Umar radiallahu anhu was very successful in this regard, and this policy of his met with unprecedented success. He dismissed some and appointed others, and the ones whom he appointed were no less qualified than those whom he dismissed. The reason being that there was a large number of people who were courageous and qualified to do this type of work. Khalid radiallahu anhu accepted this dismissal without objecting, and he remained under the command of Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah until Allah enabled him to conquer Kinisrin, where Abu Ubaidah appointed him as governor. He wrote to Umar radiallahu anhu describing the conquest and Khalid's efforts therein, and Umar spoke his famous words, Khalid has appointed himself. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy on Abu Bakr Siddiq, he had more knowledge of men than me. What Umar meant by this was that Khalid, because of his courage and heroic actions, had put himself in a position that he was used to, one of danger, courage, and taking risk. It is as if Umar meant that that Abu Bakr keeping Khalid and not agreeing to dismiss him despite Umar's urging him, or Umar having to have great confidence in Khalid's ability and military genius, which meant that no one else could fill his position except a very few of most brilliant heroes. At this point, Khalid had been working under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah for nearly 4 years, and he did not go against him even once. The virtue of Abu Ubaidah cannot be denied, for he realized the impact that this incident had on Khalid. So he treated him with a great deal of respect and kindness. He kept company with him frequently, consulted him, and respected his opinion, and sometimes placing him in position of leadership. All of this had an impact in leaving Khalid's heart free of rancor, which led him to perform those heroic military deeds. His efforts in the conquest of Damascus, Kinisrin, and Fahl bore witness to the noble spirit in which he reacted to his dismissal. In both cases, before and after, he was the sword of Allah. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. Ameen. History has recorded for us what Abu Ubaidah said when he consoled Khalid at the time of his dismissal. It is not worldly power that I seek, and it is not for this world that I strive. What you see will cease and come to an end. Rather, we are brothers who are fulfilling the command of Allah. And it doesn't matter if a man has his brother in charge of his religious and worldly affairs. Rather, the one who is in charge knows that he is more vulnerable to temptations and sin because he is in a vulnerable position, except for those whom Allah protects, and they are very few. When Abu Ubaidah asked Khalid ibn al-Walid to carry out a military mission under his command, Khalid accepted, saying, I will do it, inshallah. I was only waiting for you to tell me. Abu Ubaidah said, I felt too shy to ask you, O Abu Sulaiman. Khalid said, by Allah, if a little child had been appointed over me, I would have obeyed him. How can I go against you when you came to Al-Islam before me, and you came to Al-Islam with those who hastened to enter the faith, and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called you the Aminul Ummah, the trustworthy one of the entire Muslim nation? How can I catch up with you and achieve your status? Now I ask you to bear witness that I devote myself solely for the sake of Allah, and I will never disobey you or accept any position of governorship after this. Khalid did not stop there. Rather, he followed his words with action and immediately went and carried out the military mission that was asked of him. It is clear from Khalid's words and action that religious and moral motives played a major role in the actions of Khalid and Abu Ubaidah. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy on both of them. Khalid radiallahu anhu adhered to the principle of obedience to the Khalifa and the governor despite the fact that his personal situation had changed from that of a leader to that of a follower because of his dismissal from leadership of the army. The dismissal of Khalid on this occasion, which was the first one, was not because the Khalif had any doubt about him or bore any grudges against him, or because he had transgressed the sacred limits of Sharia, or because any aspersions he had cast on Khalid's had been cast on Khalid's piety and justice. But there were two different methods adopted by two great men, two powerful personalities, each of whom thought it was essential to implement his own methodology. If one of them had to give in, the leader of the army had to give in to the Khalifa without being stubborn or bearing any grudge or resentment. By the guidance of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, Umar appointed Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah as commander of the army in Syria, which after the battle of Yarmouk was an era which needed peace, so that grudges would end, wounds would heal, and hearts would be reconciled. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu hastened to make peace when the opportunity was there, but he did not shy away from war when it was necessary. If there was a way for peace, that is the way he would follow. Otherwise, he would prepare for war. The people of the cities in Syria had heard of Abu Ubaidah's forbearance, so they came to surrender to him. They preferred to deal with him than with anyone else. Abu Ubaidah's appointment was by Umar's instruction, and his governorship as well was also of Syria at that point was in the province of the best interest, also appointed by the Khalifa to Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. Now getting into the second dismissal of Khalid ibn al-Walid came in Qinisrin in 17 AH. News reached Umar ibn Khattab and Iyad ibn Ghanam had penetrated into, or that Iyad ibn Ghanam had penetrated into Byzantine territory and had come back with a great amount of booty, and that men had come to Khalid from far and wide, hoping for his generosity, including Al-Ash'ath ibn Qais al-Kindi, to whom Khalid gave 10,000. Nothing was hidden from Umar of what he did. Umar wrote to his commander Abu Ubaidah, ordering him to investigate the source of the wealth, from which he had given Al-Ash'ath his huge sum of 10,000 dirhams or whatever it was. It does not specify the huge sum, and to dismiss him from working with the army at all altogether. He summoned Khalid to Al-Madinah and questioned him in the presence of Abu Ubaidah. In the end, Khalid was proven innocent of taking 10,000 from the booty of the Muslims. When Khalid was told of his dismissal, he bade farewell to the people of Syria. The most that he allowed himself to show of the sorrow that he felt at this separation of a commander and his troops was when he said to the people, "The Amir al-Mu'mineen appointed me as governor in Syria until things started to become smooth and sweet. Then he dismissed me." A man stood up and said, "Be patient, O commander, for it is time for fitna." Khalid said, "So long as the son of Al-Khattab is alive, there is no room for fitna." This is a powerful and overwhelming kind of faith with which none were blessed except the chosen ones among the closest companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What spiritual strength controlled Khalid's nerves during this grave situation? What inspired Khalid to give this quiet and wise answer? The people calmed down after they heard what Khalid said in support of Umar's Caliphate. They realized that their dismissed leader was not the type of a man who would build his glory by stirring up tribulation and revolution. Rather, he was one of those men who are created to play a constructive role. And if circumstances want them to destroy what they have built, they rise above that. Khalid traveled to Al-Madinah, where he met Umar ibn al-Khattab and said to Umar, "I complained about you to the Muslims, and by Allah, you are not being kind to me." "Oh, Umar asked, "From where did the wealth come from?" He said, "From my share of the booty. Whatever is more than 60,000 is yours." Umar estimated the wealth and found that it to be 20,000, which he put into the Baytul Mal. Then he said, "O Khalid, by Allah, you are dear to me, and you will not be upset with me after today." Umar wrote to the regent saying, "I did not dismiss Khalid because I was angry with him or because of any misconduct of his part. Rather, the people were too attached to him, and I fear that Allah will leave them to him and they would be tested because of him. I wanted them to know that Allah is the one who brings victory, so that they would not be confused about this very fact." Based on the way in which Umar conducted his affairs, we can sum up the reason for Khalid's dismissal as follows. From Umar's words, rather the people were too attached to him, and I fear that they would be left to him and they would be tested because of him. It is clear that Umar feared that the people would become confused because of Khalid, and they would think that the victory came from Khalid, which would weaken their certain faith in that victory comes from Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Whether Khalid was at the head of the army or not, too much attachment to a great commander like Khalid would also lead Khalid himself to become attached to his followers. and he might think himself in a position of power which could not be challenged, especially since he was brilliant in warfare and generous with money. That could lead to a bad consequence for him and for the state, even though it may have been a far-fetched possibility given the fact that people were attached to the Caliph Umar and felt great admiration for him, and Khalid was a man of great military discipline and piety. It could, however, happen one day after Umar was gone, even with a leader such as Khalid. This required setting up guidelines at the time, and with great people such as these. In such a situation, the fear is greater with regard to a competent commander than a lesser competent who has no such image or reputations. Inshallah, we will stop here on page number 112 at the bottom, and we will pick it up going into the conquest roughly shortly here, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وتبارك اسم ربك وتعالى جدك ولا إله غيرك ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.